Imagine a civilization so old that it was already thriving while many parts of the world were still developing their earliest societies. A civilization that built massive cities, created revolutionary inventions, survived countless wars, and shaped the lives of billions of people. A civilization with a history stretching back thousands of years. That civilization is China. Today, China is one of the most powerful countries in the world, but its story did not begin yesterday. It began thousands of years ago along great rivers, where farmers, rulers, philosophers, warriors, inventors, and emperors slowly built one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. And what makes China's story so fascinating is not only its age, it's its ability to survive. Dynasties rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed, foreign invasions came and went. Yet the civilization endured, again and again, for thousands of years. Hello, my amazing students, and welcome again to your channel. My name is Clara, and today we're going to explore the incredible history of China. From its ancient beginnings to the rise of powerful dynasties, great inventions, famous emperors, and the events that helped shape the modern nation we know today. At the same time, you'll improve your English listening skills, English vocabulary, speaking confidence, and overall English fluency through this fascinating historical journey. So let's begin. To understand the history of China, we need to travel back thousands of years. Long before modern cities, long before skyscrapers, long before the internet, trains, or even written history in many parts of the world. We arrive at one of the most important places in Chinese history, the Yellow River. Often called the Mother River of China, this river helped create one of the world's earliest civilizations. Just as ancient Egypt grew along the Nile River, and Mesopotamia developed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Chinese civilization began to flourish along the Yellow River. Now imagine the scene. Small farming communities, simple homes, fields of crops, families working together to survive. Life was difficult. Floods could destroy entire villages. Food was never guaranteed, and survival depended on cooperation. But these early communities slowly grew stronger. Agriculture improved, villages expanded, trade developed, and over time, larger political systems began to emerge. Now here's something fascinating. The earliest period of Chinese history is partly mixed with legend. One of the most famous early dynasties is the Zhou Dynasty. According to traditional Chinese history, the Zhou Dynasty was the first dynasty of China. For centuries, historians debated whether it truly existed, because much of what we know comes from ancient records written much later. Nevertheless, the Zhou Dynasty remains an important part of Chinese cultural history. Now, after the Zhou came the Qing Dynasty, and this is where history becomes much clearer. The Qing Dynasty ruled around 1600 BCE, more than 3,000 years ago. The Qing people developed advanced bronze technology, created impressive weapons and tools, built organized cities, and most importantly, left behind written records. This is one reason the Qing Dynasty is so significant. It gives historians some of the earliest direct evidence of Chinese civilization. Now imagine holding one of those ancient records, thousands of years old, covered with symbols that eventually evolved into modern Chinese writing. It's incredible to think that a writing tradition that began so long ago still influences China today. Now let's go deeper. The Qing rulers believed strongly in ancestors. They thought family members who had died could still influence the living. As a result, ancestor worship became an important part of Chinese culture. And this respect for family would remain a major theme throughout Chinese history. Even today, family continues to play a central role in Chinese society. Now, eventually, the Shang Dynasty fell, and another powerful dynasty emerged, the Zhou Dynasty. This dynasty would become one of the most influential in Chinese history, not because of military power alone, but because of ideas that would shape Chinese civilization for thousands of years. Now, here's something important. The Zhou rulers introduced a concept called the Mandate of Heaven. This idea was simple but powerful. According to the Mandate of Heaven, a ruler governed because heaven allowed it. If a ruler became corrupt, cruel, or ineffective, heaven could remove its support, and another ruler could take power. This idea helped explain why dynasties rose and fell. It also created an expectation that rulers should govern responsibly. Now, think about how revolutionary that was. Instead of believing rulers had unlimited power forever, people believed leadership came with responsibility, and responsibility came with consequences. Now, during the Zhou period, China also experienced major intellectual growth. Some of the most influential thinkers in Chinese history appeared during this era. One of them was Confucius. Confucius became one of the most important philosophers in world history. His teachings emphasized respect, education, family, responsibility, good leadership, and moral behavior. His influence became so powerful that it shaped Chinese society for more than 2,000 years. Even today, many of his ideas remain influential. Now, imagine creating ideas that continue affecting millions of people thousands of years after your death. That's exactly what Confucius achieved. Another major thinker was Lao Tzu, associated with Taoism, a philosophy that encouraged harmony with nature, simplicity, and balance. Together, these philosophies helped shape the cultural foundations of China. Now, here's something remarkable. While many civilizations disappeared completely over time, China developed systems, traditions, philosophies, and institutions that survived generation after generation. Wars happened, conflicts happened, dynasties changed, yet many core cultural ideas remained. And that's one reason Chinese civilization became one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. Now, imagine standing beside the Yellow River thousands of years ago, watching farmers work the land, watching villages grow, watching the earliest foundations of a civilization slowly emerge. Those people could never have imagined the future. They could never have imagined modern China. But they were laying the foundations for one of the most influential civilizations the world has ever known. And that was only the beginning of the story. By the time the Zhou Dynasty weakened, China was no longer one united nation. Instead, it was divided into many competing states. Each state wanted power. Each ruler wanted control. And for centuries, war became a regular part of life. This period became known as the Warring States period, and as the name suggests, it was a time of constant conflict. Now imagine living during those years. Armies moving across the land, kings fighting for territory, alliances forming and breaking, entire regions struggling to survive. It was a chaotic time. But out of that chaos, a powerful leader eventually emerged. His name was Qin Shi Huang, and he would change Chinese history forever. Now here's something fascinating. Before Qin Shi Huang, China was culturally connected but politically divided. Different states had different laws, different systems, different currencies, different measurements. Travel and trade were often complicated. Qin Shi Huang wanted to change that, and he did. Through conquest. One by one, he defeated rival states, until eventually, for the first time in history, much of China was united under a single ruler. In 221 BCE, Qin Shi Huang became the first emperor of China, a title that reflected the enormous significance of his achievement. Now imagine the challenge he faced. Uniting the land was only the beginning. Keeping it united was even harder. So the first emperor introduced major reforms. He standardized weights and measures, standardized currency, standardized writing, and improved transportation systems. These changes may sound simple today, but at the time, they were revolutionary. They made communication easier, trade easier, government more efficient, and they helped transform many separate regions into one empire. Now here's something remarkable. Even though the Qin Dynasty lasted only about 15 years, its influence lasted far longer. In fact, the very name China is believed by many historians to have originated from the word Qin. That's how significant this dynasty was. Now let's talk about one of the most famous structures in human history, the Great Wall. Many people imagine the Great Wall as a single project built all at once, but that's not exactly what happened. Before Qin Shi Huang, several states had already built defensive walls. The first emperor ordered many of these walls to be connected and expanded. His goal was protection, particularly from northern groups that threatened the empire. The result became the early foundation of what would eventually evolve into the Great Wall of China. Now imagine thousands of workers laboring across mountains, deserts, and remote landscapes, building defenses across vast distances. It was one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world, and parts of the wall still stand today, more than 2,000 years later. Now here's another fascinating fact. Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with immortality. He wanted to live forever. Like many powerful rulers throughout history, he feared death. So he searched for ways to extend his life. He sent expeditions, consulted advisors, and pursued various remedies. Ironically, none of them worked. But his desire to be remembered certainly did. Now let's talk about one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history, the Terracotta Army. Near the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, archaeologists discovered thousands of life-sized clay soldiers. Thousands! Each with unique facial features, unique details, unique expressions. The emperor believed these soldiers would protect him in the afterlife. Today, the Terracotta Army is considered one of the most extraordinary archaeological treasures ever found. Imagine standing in front of thousands of ancient warriors created over 2,000 years ago. It's almost impossible not to be amazed. Now, despite all his achievements, Qin Shi Huang was a controversial figure. Some people admired his vision and leadership. Others criticized his harsh methods. His government was strict, punishments could be severe, and many people suffered during massive construction projects. That's one of the interesting things about history. Great leaders are often complex. They can achieve extraordinary things while also causing tremendous hardship. Now, eventually, the first emperor died, and after his death, the Qin Dynasty quickly began to weaken. Rebellions erupted, political instability grew, and within only a few years, the dynasty collapsed. At first glance, that might make the Qin Dynasty seem like a failure. But history tells a different story. Because although the dynasty itself disappeared, many of its reforms survived. The idea of a unified China survived. Standardized systems survived. Centralized government survived. And those foundations would help shape every dynasty that followed. That's why Qin Shi Huang remains one of the most important figures in Chinese history. Not because his dynasty lasted a long time, but because he fundamentally changed what China could become. And the next dynasty would build upon those foundations and create one of the greatest golden ages in ancient Chinese history. When the Qin Dynasty collapsed, China once again entered a period of uncertainty. Power struggles emerged, rebellions spread, and many people wondered what would happen next. But out of that instability came one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history, the Han Dynasty. And for many historians, this period marks the beginning of China's first true golden age. Now imagine living during this time. The empire becomes more stable, trade expands, agriculture improves, cities grow, knowledge spreads, and for the first time, China begins developing into one of the most powerful civilizations on Earth. The Han Dynasty began in 206 BCE, founded by a man named Liu Bang. What's fascinating is that Liu Bang was not born into royalty. He wasn't an emperor's son. He wasn't part of a powerful royal family. He rose from relatively humble origins and eventually became the first Han emperor. His story became a symbol of opportunity and determination. Now, here's something important. The Han rulers learned from the mistakes of the Qin Dynasty. The Qin government had often been extremely strict. The Han leaders chose a different approach. They kept many useful reforms introduced by Qin Shi Huang, but governed with greater flexibility. This helped create more stability, and stability created growth. Now let's talk about one of the most important ideas in Chinese history, Confucianism. Remember Confucius from the Zhou Dynasty? During the Han Dynasty, his teachings became deeply integrated into government and society. Education became increasingly important. Officials were expected to possess knowledge and good character. Respect for family and responsibility remained central values, and these ideas would influence China for centuries. Now, imagine a civilization where education becomes one of the most respected paths to success. That tradition began growing strongly during the Han era, and its influence can still be seen today. Now, here's where the story becomes even more exciting. The Han Dynasty expanded China's connections with the outside world, and that led to the creation of one of the most famous trade networks in history, the Silk Road. Now, despite its name, the Silk Road was not a single road. It was a vast network of routes connecting China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. Merchants traveled enormous distances, crossing deserts, mountains, grasslands, and dangerous territories, carrying valuable goods. Now imagine a trader leaving China with silk, one of the most valuable products in the ancient world. Along the journey, they might encounter merchants from Persia, India, Central Asia, and many other regions. Goods changed hands repeatedly, cultures interacted, ideas spread, and entire civilizations became more connected. Now, here's something fascinating. The Silk Road didn't only transport products, it transported knowledge, religions, technologies, languages, and cultural ideas. In many ways, it became one of the earliest forms of globalization, long before airplanes, long before the internet, long before modern transportation. People were already creating international networks of exchange. Now let's talk about inventions. The Han Dynasty produced remarkable innovations. One of the most important was paper. Before paper became widespread, writing materials were often expensive and difficult to produce. Paper transformed communication. Knowledge could be recorded more easily. Books became more practical. Information could spread more efficiently. It's difficult to imagine modern civilization without paper. And its development during the Han period became one of China's greatest contributions to world history. Now here's another impressive achievement. The Han Dynasty developed advanced systems of government. Road networks expanded, trade increased, agriculture became more productive, population grew dramatically. At its height, the Han Empire became one of the largest and most powerful empires in the world. In fact, historians often compare the Han Dynasty to the Roman Empire. Both existed during roughly the same era. Both became enormous powers, and both influenced vast regions of the world. Now imagine two great civilizations flourishing at opposite ends of Eurasia. Rome in the west, Han China in the east. Each developing sophisticated governments, trade systems, and cultures. It's one of the most fascinating periods in world history. Now, of course, no dynasty lasts forever. Over time, problems began to emerge. Political conflicts increased. Economic difficulties appeared. Corruption weakened parts of the government, and eventually, the Han Dynasty began to decline. In 220 CE, it finally collapsed, ending more than 4 centuries of rule. Now, you might think that the end of such a great dynasty would erase its achievements, but history worked differently. The Han legacy survived. Its political ideas survived. Its cultural influence survived. Its educational traditions survived. And its impact became so powerful that even today, the majority ethnic group in China is known as the Han people. Think about that. A dynasty that ended nearly 2,000 years ago still influences identity in modern China. That's extraordinary. The Han Dynasty helped establish many of the foundations of Chinese civilization. It strengthened government, expanded trade, encouraged learning, connected China to the wider world, and created a legacy that would endure long after the emperors themselves were gone. And yet, even greater dynasties and even more dramatic events still awaited China in the centuries ahead. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, China entered a long period of division. Different kingdoms competed for power. Wars erupted. Dynasties rose and fell. And for centuries, the country remained fragmented. But history was preparing for another remarkable chapter, one that many historians consider one of the greatest golden ages in Chinese civilization, the Tang Dynasty. Now imagine China around the year 618 CE. A new dynasty emerges. Political stability returns. Trade expands. Art flourishes. Culture thrives. And China becomes one of the most advanced societies on Earth. The Tang Dynasty is often remembered as an age of prosperity, confidence, and creativity. In fact, many historians describe it as one of the most brilliant periods in Chinese history. Now here's something fascinating. The capital city of Chang'an became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. People arrived from across Asia, merchants, travelers, scholars, diplomats, religious leaders. The city became a center of international exchange. Imagine walking through its streets, hearing different languages, seeing people from distant lands, encountering goods and ideas from all over Asia. It must have felt like the center of the world. Now let's talk about culture. The Tang Dynasty produced some of China's greatest poets, and poetry became incredibly important. One famous poet was Li Bai. His works are still studied and admired today, more than 1,000 years later. Think about that. Words written centuries ago still inspiring readers today. That's the power of culture. Now, here's another important development. Buddhism continued spreading throughout China during this period. Temples were built, religious ideas circulated, and spiritual traditions became deeply woven into Chinese society. At the same time, Confucianism and Taoism remained influential. China became a place where multiple philosophies and beliefs shaped daily life. Now let's move forward to another extraordinary dynasty, the Song Dynasty, founded in 960 CE. If the Tang Dynasty was famous for culture, the Song Dynasty became famous for innovation. And this is where the story becomes truly impressive. Now imagine living during the Song period. Cities are expanding rapidly, trade is booming, education is flourishing, technology is advancing. Many historians believe China during the Song Dynasty was one of the most technologically advanced societies in the world. Now here's something remarkable. Several inventions that changed human history either appeared or improved significantly during this era. One of them was printing. Before printing, producing books was slow and expensive. Printing allowed knowledge to spread much more quickly. Books became more accessible, education expanded, ideas traveled farther, and societies became more connected through written information. Now imagine how revolutionary that was. For the first time, knowledge could reach large numbers of people more efficiently than ever before. Another important invention was the magnetic compass. This simple device transformed navigation. Sailors could travel farther, trade routes expanded, exploration became easier, and global connections increased. Today, it's difficult to imagine navigation without it, yet its development helped shape world history. Now let's talk about gunpowder. Originally developed in China, gunpowder would eventually transform warfare around the globe. At first, it was used for fireworks and ceremonial purposes, but over time, its military applications became clear, and its influence would spread far beyond China. Now here's another fascinating achievement. The Song Dynasty developed one of the world's earliest forms of paper money. Think about how advanced that idea was. Instead of carrying large amounts of metal coins, people could use paper currency. This made trade more efficient and helped support economic growth. Many centuries before modern banking systems fully developed elsewhere, China was already experimenting with financial innovations. Now let's go deeper. The Song Dynasty also placed enormous importance on education. Government officials were often selected through competitive examinations. People studied for years to pass these exams. Knowledge and learning became pathways to opportunity. This emphasis on education would remain an important feature of Chinese society for generations. Now imagine being a young student during the Song Dynasty, spending years preparing for examinations that could change your future. That tradition helped create a culture that deeply respected learning and scholarship. Now here's something important. Despite all its achievements, the Song Dynasty faced challenges. Powerful enemies surrounded the empire. Military threats increased. Pressure from northern groups continued growing. And eventually, foreign conquerors would dramatically reshape Chinese history. But before that happened, the Tang and Song dynasties had already left an extraordinary legacy. They expanded culture, advanced technology, strengthened education, promoted trade, and contributed innovations that influenced civilizations around the world. Many of the things we associate with advanced societies today, education, printing, financial systems, innovation, international trade, were flourishing in China centuries ago. And that's why this period is often remembered as one of the brightest chapters in Chinese history, a time when creativity, learning, and innovation helped push civilization forward. But the next chapter would bring a completely different story, one involving conquest, empire, and one of the most famous leaders in world history, the Mongols. By the 1200s, a new force was rising across the grasslands of Asia, the Mongols, and leading them was one of the most famous conquerors in history, Genghis Khan. Now imagine vast armies moving across enormous distances, crossing deserts, crossing mountains, crossing open plains. The Mongols built the largest contiguous land empire in human history. an empire stretching across much of Asia and beyond. And eventually, they reached China. After years of conquest, the Mongols gained control of the country, and in 1271, a new dynasty was established, the Yuan Dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. For the first time in Chinese history, the entire country was ruled by a foreign dynasty. Now here's something fascinating. Kublai Khan was not only a conqueror, he was also a ruler who wanted stability. He adopted many Chinese traditions, used Chinese officials, supported trade, and encouraged international connections. During this period, travelers from distant regions visited China. One of the most famous was a young merchant from Venice. His name was Marco Polo. According to his accounts, he spent years in China and later described its wealth, cities, and innovations to Europeans. His stories helped introduce many people in Europe to the wonders of China. Now imagine hearing about paper money, enormous cities, and advanced technologies at a time when many Europeans had never seen such things. It must have sounded incredible. Now, eventually, the Yuan dynasty weakened. Economic problems appeared, natural disasters occurred, rebellions spread, and finally, the Mongol rulers lost control. A new Chinese dynasty emerged, the Ming Dynasty. And for many people, the Ming Dynasty represents one of the most iconic periods of Chinese history. Now, here's something remarkable. The Ming rulers restored Chinese control and oversaw a period of stability and prosperity. Trade expanded, agriculture improved, art flourished, and many of the most famous sections of the Great Wall were rebuilt and strengthened during this period. When most people imagine the Great Wall today, they're often looking at sections built during the Ming Dynasty. Now let's talk about one of the most extraordinary explorers in history, Zheng He, a Chinese admiral who commanded enormous fleets. Massive ships traveled across Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. These voyages demonstrated China's wealth, power, and technological sophistication. Imagine seeing hundreds of giant ships arriving from across the ocean. It must have been astonishing. Yet, despite these impressive expeditions, China eventually reduced many of its overseas activities and focused more on internal affairs. Now let's move forward again. In 1644, another major change occurred. A new dynasty took power, the Qing Dynasty. Founded by the Manchus from northeastern Asia, the Qing dynasty would become the last imperial dynasty of China, and it ruled for nearly 3 centuries. During its early years, China expanded significantly. Population increased dramatically, trade grew, and the empire reached one of the largest territorial sizes in its history. But as time passed, new challenges appeared. And these challenges came from both inside and outside the country. Now the world was changing rapidly. European powers were expanding globally. Industrialization was transforming economies. Technology was advancing quickly, and China faced increasing pressure from foreign nations. The 19th century became a difficult period. Conflicts occurred, foreign influence increased, and internal rebellions weakened the empire. Many Chinese leaders recognized that major reforms were needed, but change was often slow and difficult. Now, imagine a civilization with thousands of years of history suddenly facing a rapidly changing modern world. The challenge was enormous. Eventually, in 1911, the Qing Dynasty collapsed, ending more than 2,000 years of imperial rule. Think about that. For over 2 millennia, emperors had ruled China. Now, that era was over. A new chapter was beginning. The 20th century brought dramatic changes, political struggles, revolutions, wars, periods of instability. And eventually, in 1949, the modern People's Republic of China was established. Now let's look at China today. It is one of the most influential countries in the world, a global economic power, a leader in technology, manufacturing, trade, and innovation, home to more than 1 billion people, and one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. Now here's the incredible part. When you look at modern China, you're also looking at thousands of years of history. The Yellow River farmers, the Shang rulers, the philosophers of the Zhou Dynasty, the first emperor, the Silk Road merchants, the poets of the Tang Dynasty, the inventors of the Song Dynasty, the explorers of the Ming Dynasty, and countless generations who helped shape the nation. Their stories are all part of the same historical journey. And that's what makes the history of China so fascinating. It's not just the story of a country, it's the story of one of humanity's longest, richest, and most influential civilizations. A civilization that survived wars, dynasties, invasions, revolutions, and enormous change, yet continued to adapt, continued to grow, and continued to influence the world. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. The history of China is not simply a story about the past. It's a story about resilience, adaptation, innovation, and the remarkable ability of a civilization to endure across thousands of years.